chat for a while.
Yeah.
So it's there's the Canadian girlfriend, the famous Canadian girlfriend. I'm sure you had a couple of those, David. In your case, I guess, were they American girlfriends? You talked about how you went to camp in America and had a secret girlfriend.
I think I was married so early that I had a Canadian wife.
We're coming up on the start here as people kind of roll in. It's going to take us a second to do this new simulcast going. So I've been put in this spot as the interrogator here because of, my lack of grays. And I really did need this because Bill started the story by letting me know that a 23-year-old thought I was too old to be approached. And so now, just kind of for my age ego old, to feel youthfulness, I needed to kind of be the token here with our.
You thought you were too august, Tim, not too old.
Yes. Right. Man, being called august is worse than being called old. Well, yuck. Okay, I think we're 25 seconds in here. So I'll do a formal start in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thursday Night Bulwark. I am Tim Miller. I want to welcome our new members. We have a bunch of new Bulwark Plus members over the past week, which is very cool. Very grateful for everybody joining our effort, in addition to new Bulwark staffers, not just members, with Kathy Young now writing for us, has a wonderful article today. Old Will Salatin and Dr. Ted Johnson have been on for a few weeks now, but it is good times here at the Bulwark. We also have a simulcast now we're doing on YouTube. Welcome to the YouTubers. You do get to see my LSU Tiger shirt and see our august panel, but what you don't get to do is contribute in the really cool chat we have going, a very vibrant chat. People, make fun of us on the panel. People give us feedback. There's wisecracks. You can be, if you enjoy these Thursday night live streams and want to take a part of the chat, you just got to join Bulwark Plus. We're here today with obviously Mona Charon and Bill Crystal, but with special guest David Frum. In serious times, we need to bring serious people into the Bulwark live chat. And before he answers, I do just want to say that David is coming at us from an undisclosed location, just in case there are any ICE agents out there. We don't want them to know where he's broadcasting from. David, welcome.
Thank you.
David's disappointed the Canadian truckers didn't come visit him in Washington. They got pretty close to the Beltway, right? And then they just turned around or something. What happened to them?
The Canadian truckers, they went from being symbolic to being actual, and they got canceled.
Right.
Ouch. Well, I want to start one more thing I want to say at the intro. If you want to ask us questions, we'll get to questions of the audience at the end. There's a Q&A section you can see there at the bottom. Put your genuine questions in the Q&A. If you just want to make fun of me and have jokey questions, you can put those into the regular chat. And I guess we were teasing, but I do want to start with David. For those who missed it, Tucker Carlson suggested your deportation back to Canada last night because I guess of your warmongering. I'm curious what you think it is about your advocacy since the Russia invasion of Ukraine that has merited the ire of Putin's most fervent defender in the American media.
Well, I think both Bill and I have a special place in Tucker Carlson's imagination because we know him and he feels seen. One of the things that Tucker Carlson often talks about is why people don't go volunteer and how cowardly everybody is. And I have to say, I was there on the night where Tucker Carlson did the most heroic, manly, and courageous thing in his life. And that was an evening in 1997 where he surreptitiously poured a Bloody Mary upon the head of Grover Norquist, and then immediately ran away afterwards. So that was I think a real moment of personal. I think Bill might have been at that event too. I remember running into Grover Norquist's then girlfriend immediately afterwards, and she was just in a rage. Could she find Tucker because he had poured this Bloody Mary on Grover's head, and Grover was coming after him, and Grover's a board member of the NRA, so that's sort of serious when he comes after you. But Tucker was nowhere to be found.
I do want to, just before we get down to serious business, and we'll get to Ukraine next, but since you both have partied with Tucker, since you all are of the same era, is there any insight on the panel as to whether there is, a hint of doubt, a little Jiminy Cricket on his shoulder. Any thought, any insight you can provide to those in the chat who are coming from all across America who don't know about why someone would continue in such a despicable, trolly, pro-Putin posture in the face of just the heinous crimes that are happening in Eastern Europe? Any insight into the mind of Tucker Carlson?
I have a theory, but I'll defer to Bill, who I think.
No, you go. Go ahead, David.
So I think there is internet culture has fostered a troll sensibility, where there are people who that's just what they are. That's what they do. And I think Tucker Carlson is one of those. And the problem with among the problems of the troll sensibility is you lose a sense that there's actually a life out there beyond the joshing and memes and in-jokes of the internet. And I watched a bit of, I'm not a regular viewer, but I watched a bit of Carlson's show on the first weeknight after the invasion. And you saw this sick dread on the face of a man who thought, I thought this thing was a joke. I thought you could write these checks forever and they would never be cashed. And the idea that there is actually a real life that is not just about memes and in-jokes and references, and that there are people who are whatever else you say about Vladimir Putin, he has goals and he has objectives and he's willing to wreck lives in order to achieve them. And that sense of, my God, this is not just a joke. And I'm now caught. I'm trapped. I'm offside. Now I'm sure he's a conscienceless person, and I don't think he'll be worried for very long, assuming his paymasters don't yank the cord. But in that moment, you saw the fear of someone who suddenly discovered that there was something real beyond just japes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm a generation older than Tucker Carlson, so wasn't really socialized with him that much. But I would say, I don't know, I'd make a broader point, though, maybe not so much specific to him and not specific to the internet culture or anything, though I think that's an interesting point David makes, which is, I think you start off, and he certainly started off being cynical about Trump, but it was good for ratings, and it was kind of a half joke, and he would privately just had contempt for Trump. He did like, what's the phrase, épater les bourgeois. He liked shocking not in this case, the mainstream people who believed in old-fashioned silly things like liberal democracy and tolerance and not being bigoted and not, attacking various ethnic groups and so forth. And he liked shocking everyone. But I do think what happens, and I think you see this in the 20s and 30s, don't you, some with people, intellectual types even, they start off semi-ironic and sort of with a wink, and then then they get attacked, and then they attack back, and it's good for business, and it's good for their stature, and suddenly it's not so much of a wink. So it's very hard to know. I mean, we've seen this with others too, who we've known over the years, right? They slide gradually from somewhat ironic enjoyment of annoying people like us to semi-believing it, to mostly believing it, to being sometimes really full in and really conscienceless. I do think the degree to which one's character maybe wasn't so great to start with, who knows, but can get just eroded by that kind of performative embrace of authoritarianism. Turns out to be, it's much worse than I thought. It's very hard to sustain that kind of, I'm only a quarter in, and I think the rewards for going all the way in were so great. And I just don't know, maybe he's just all the way in. He just doesn't like people who like liberal democracy, and he is fine with authoritarians, even if they're slaughtering a lot of people.
Can I add something to that? Because Bill makes a very profound point, and I think it actually describes everyone on this podcast, the Bulwark as a phenomenon and an institution, because there is that slide, and I think all that. I won't speak for Tim, but the rest of us, we were sort of one quarter in, and then we slid out. That as the bill is presented, you have to have this reaction as, how am I going to deal with this? I had this reaction through the Trump years. The great theme of the Trump years was what economists call revealed preferences. And that's just a technical way of saying that what matters is what you do, not what you say. But there's a subtler idea, which is you often actually don't understand what you think until you're called upon to act on it. And in that moment of action, you reveal what you really think and what your fundamental commitments are. So I think, when Bill talked about tolerance and liberal democracy, I mean, yeah, we were all in 1998, we were all sort of for that. And we were all sort of for the 1998 version of a little bit of trolling and shocking liberals. And then there was this kind of glacial drift where your foot was on one foot was on one ice floe and the other foot was on another ice floe. We're using Canadian metaphors here. And the ice floes began to pull apart, and you had to put both of your feet on the same ice floe. And I think someone like Tucker Carlson went all in for the politics of cruelty, which lead to authoritarianism, which lead, as we're seeing in Ukraine, to, horror. And I think others, but that's the story of Bill and Mona, I think me, that, we had a foot on one ice floe and another, and then we drew the foot back and said, no, we're standing with the main tradition of what actually made America great.
I very much put myself in that category. Yeah, I'll get to Mona. I very much put myself in that category, and I was a good troller during the Obama era. Maybe a little too good for my own taste, I would say. Actually, I have some regret on that regard. Mona, I'd like you to add to this, but I just want to kind of bring in one positive note. You can sort of hit both points. One of the things I've been surprised by, and we'll see how long it lasts. We're only a weekend, but in a series of polls over the last week, we've seen that Republican voters are not exactly as open to the Tucker point of view as I might have thought. And I think that it was, and I very rarely have looked at poll numbers of Republican voters recently and been encouraged. And it's been, a green shoot. And so I do wonder if you think maybe he's miscalculated this. Feel free to chime in on David's point as well, but on both, I would like your perspective.
Sure. Well, okay. First, let me just add to what David and Bill said so eloquently, and that is just a little story, which is that some of my detractors have written to me over recent years and said, "Well, so now you've been found out. You are a liberal," and my response is, well, that's right. I mean, yeah, I'm a liberal in the sense that I believe in all of the liberal values that I thought you believed in too. I thought we were all agreed on certain just elemental, basics of a self-governing democracy, individual liberty, human dignity, limited government, all those things that the 19th century liberals preached. And it turns out that there were a hell of a lot of people who I thought were on my team, but who really weren't liberal at all. They were just, they actually admired strong men, authoritarians, and wanted to see their ends. They weren't interested in the means. And if you're a liberal, you have to care about means. That you have to. Okay, regarding the polling, I think there are a couple things going on here. One is really terrible timing. I mean, it is just impossible to, even for people who are pretty far gone in admiring dictators, to swallow the outright invasion of an innocent, democratic, brave country without a certain amount of distaste. The other thing is that you don't have Donald Trump providing excuses, explanations, and so forth for Putin that you would have had, by the way, if he had been in the White House. And so I think the Republican response might have been different if Trump were still in office.
David, Bill, any encouraging signs from the fact?
One point I want to ask, this is, I very much agree. That's a very shrewd point. I hadn't really thought about that, the degree to which the Republicans being sort of leaderless, and Trump hasn't quite stepped up as much as he might have, actually. I mean, we put out Defending Democracy Together, the Republican Accountability Project put out an excellent ad showing Trump just last weekend excusing, in effect, Putin, praising his intelligence. But he's not out every day reading parts of speeches written for him by Steve Miller, excusing Putin. And so in a way, the normal propaganda machine's a little more muted than it might have been 2 years ago, or than it was 2 years ago. Think of Ukraine impeachment. And that's probably had some effect. They're sort of leaderless, which has allowed the more normal, if I can say, Republicans to remember that they're supposed to be against Russia invading democratic neighbors. What was the line? But on your first point, I've always quoted this line of David's, and now I'm slightly garbling it. So 4 or 5 years ago, David wrote that, you wrote that if it comes to it, given the character of contemporary conservatism, something like that, if it comes to it, conservatism will choose if the choice is between democracy and conservative goals, they'll choose conservative goals. What was it? Something. It was a very, very apt formulation, which turned out to be extremely prescient.
It was one of those. It started. I thank you for remembering that. I can quote the line, but
yeah, good.
It's often misunderstood. It was not meant as a criticism of conservatism. It was meant as a criticism of nihilistic politics. And the line was, if conservatives lose confidence that they can compete democratically, they won't give up on conservatism. They will give up on democracy. And the point was not to denounce conservatives as anti-democratic. It was to say it was really important because, look, I think conservatism and progressivism are born into the brain soup of us as human beings. It's like optimists and pessimists. It's like, people who like salty and people who like sweet. It's just the way human beings are constituted. And there is a statistically predictable number at birth of people who look one way or the other. And that both are what make us human. And they both are committed to these things, and they need to be optimistic that they have a chance in democratic competition, because if they don't believe that, they will then turn to anti-democratic competition. And so the point of that saying was to say it's really important that we have meaningful, effective, competitive, conservative competitors, because otherwise they will turn in ways that are dangerous to the whole society. And I think we're seeing that now on Ukraine. I mean, it is remarkable that, look, here's the good news and here's the bad news. The good news is there is no serious Republican elected official. I mean, there are oddball, weirdo Congress people, but among the leaders in House and Senate, there is no one who is denouncing American assistance to Ukraine. It's almost unanimous, and that the Trumps, the Tuckers, and the Teal-backed Senate candidates, who looks like are all going to lose, they are stranded and isolated. That's one of the reasons why they're so dyspeptic and unpleasant, is that they see that where is McConnell, where is Kevin McCarthy, where are the leaders, the ranking members on the important committees in Congress, where is even Marco Rubio? It's like that scene in Casablanca, where the French prostitute hears La Marseillaise, and she stands up and with tears in her eyes begins to sing, and that's Marco Rubio. Yes, he sleeps with German officers, but when the Marseillaise strikes up, he's still, there's a part of him that is still French.
It's 2022, David. I don't know. All you guys are just like laughing around, talking about the big band era. I don't know what that. I'm not sure about. I've never seen that. But go ahead.
But here's the negative. That what it should be possible for a Kevin McCarthy or a Mitch McConnell or a John Thune to do is to say, I have important disagreements with President Biden on domestic policy, but on this matter of Ukraine, of course, all Americans are united as one. And then to pose for the photo op where there's the president in the middle and there are the leaders of the two parties and two houses on either side flanking the president. That can't be. And so what you're getting is a lot of people saying, Biden is weak, Biden is terrible, I oppose the Biden administration. What I think we should be doing instead, and then they describe exactly the policy of the Biden administration. Instead of the weak will, I think we should be we should be aiding the Ukrainian resistance. I think we should be sending them arms. I think we should be applying economic sanctions, not like what is happening now, which is exactly the same thing. And oh, by the way, I think we shouldn't be sending U.S. ground troops. And that's my big difference with these people who are also not sending U.S. ground troops.
Yeah, I'll say the encouraging part. I thought, for example, Kim Reynolds. I don't know if you guys stayed up late enough for Kim Reynolds' response. It was just atrocious. She did not do what you just laid out, David, about even offering a modest amount of lip service to unity with the president and unity in our country's unity with our NATO allies and the people of Ukraine. She just went straight into the Biden attack dog stuff. So that's on the bad side. Is this a good side, a silver lining, maybe just better than the worst case scenario? I do think you could have imagined a scenario, where it seemed like the Teal-backed candidates and the Trumps and the Tuckers were winning the argument within the party. I mean, this had happened over the last 5 years on a number of occasions when there were traditional totems of classically liberal values that were in threat, and Trump and kind of the Tuckers of the world took one side and the McConnells took the other side, and the people were on the Trump side, and slowly but surely the McConnells started walking over to the Trump side or stopping talking about that issue or being anti it. and we haven't seen that now. So I just, that's a modest green shoot amidst, a lot of terribleness within
Well,
the
let me point you
coalition.
to a bigger green shoot, because I think behind all of everything we're describing, behind all the U.S. politics, has been a larger argument from a certain kind of cultural reactionary, and not just in this country, but on both sides of the Atlantic, that liberal democracy is decadent, liberal democracy is weak, liberal democracy is divided, and that the appeal of the dictator today, as always, is the dictator appears virile and decisive and manly. And one of the things that, and this is the gift that Ukraine has given us, and Zelensky in particular has given us, and why we maybe owe him, is suddenly everything that was portrayed as decadent and weak looks strong. And everything that was portrayed as powerful and fearsome looks just brutal and stupid. And as appalling as what is happening, as what Russia is in Ukraine is doing, it doesn't look like success. It looks like the destructive lashing out of people who are inwardly beaten and who are on their way to being outwardly beaten.
The Republican Accountability Project ad on this point was really good today, and I think it's the first start. I do agree with you, David. I think that there is, a sense of momentum, on the side of liberal democracy and free people, and sort of demonstrating the problems with the Russian system that maybe there hasn't been over the past few years. I want to.
Can I just add one thing, Tim? I mean, I do. We'll see, right? I mean, things could get rougher. Gas prices can go up. There could be tougher decisions that the administration might have to make. We have to make, and NATO allies have to make, and we'll see how. I hope the green shoots become green. Whatever comes after shoots. What's after shoot? That's always such a common metaphor, but I don't know.
Trunks.
Anyway, little flowers. I don't know. Anyway, but it could be like some of these other cases where they slide back, right? And we've seen that in the past. The other thing I would say is the one price we're paying, I do think, is we still don't have a responsible opposition party that should be doing what John McCain would have done, which is say, well, look, I support the president, photo op the president. He's mostly right, but there are 3 or 4 things I think we could do in addition. And I just read a piece actually by General Breedlove and Kurt Volker, which is people could find if they want to look at my Twitter thing. I tweeted it. It's General Breedlove was head of NATO a few years ago. Kurt Volker was a bipartisan, worked as an ambassador and so forth to Ukraine and places like that under both parties actually, and I think career foreign service. And very sensible. I mean, I don't know if this, I can't judge. They seem to me to be the very sensible proposals for why we could be a little more forward-leaning, a little tougher on some of our military assistance. We could push a little harder. They're very quite specific, A-10s and a partial no-fly zone in the western part for civilians. And this is doable. This is General Breedlove, who's head of NATO, who was not, I was on a call with him about 10 days ago, is not a waving hawk or anything. He's a very sensible, solid, very careful military guy. But a normal opposition party would be doing that and actually helping the policy process, right? Having a hearing and having some experts, and Senator McCain and people like that, and would say, what about, couldn't we push harder on this? This is sort of what happened in the Balkans. Clinton intervened, but some of us thought he could intervene a little more aggressively. And of course, we're just depending on people on the outside, like Kurt and General Breedlove, to be writing these pieces, which is fine. But we still do not have really a responsible party. It's good that it's not as irresponsible as it could be, though.
Mona, to that point, to Bill's point, one of the things I wanted to get into was if there was a substantive criticism from the modestly responsible parts of the opposition party right now, it would be on the energy sanctions. I think you wrote about energy this week a little bit. That's in the question of things that Biden should be doing, not necessarily sanctions, but other pro-energy policies. I'm interested in your thoughts, and then everybody, and then the others. Klain was on Pod Save America, and his argument against was that sanctions might actually help Putin in a weird way on energy. If oil prices really do spike, then conceivably, he could be getting more bang for his buck on their existing, oil resources. Obviously, the pushback, on the other side is that, they, without greater energy sanctions, it's going to be hard to really strangle the Russian economy. Sense on that, and then if and additionally anything else from your perspective the Biden administration and our allies should be doing right now.
So before getting to the energy question, which is very important, I want to make another point about Republican conduct here, because not only have they failed to do the thing that was traditional, which was to say, while we have our disagreements about domestic matters, we're all united in opposing this kind of grotesque aggression by so-and-so, right? Do that. They not only haven't done that, but they've really hammered the Biden is weak, Biden is feckless. This is kind of Biden's fault. And you're getting that not just from stray Republicans, but from the official, Twitter account of the Republicans in Congress and so forth.
Reynolds said that.
And that strikes me as actually pretty dangerous at a moment like this, when actually we need unity in the face of a genuine international threat. And when you combine that with the kinds of things that Trump, who has not gone completely quiet, is doing. So today, I don't know if you saw this, but he tweeted, no, he was being interviewed by Maria Bartiromo. And she said, do you think that the Chinese are going to invade Taiwan sooner rather than later? And he said, oh, yes, much, sooner for sure, because this administration is so weak and so bad. Basically inviting the Chinese to invade a country, a free country, by the way, and kill God knows how many people so that he can look good vis-a-vis his successor. I mean, it is so sick and so pathological. And yet that he's the leader of one of the two major parties in America. And that kind of message is not all that different, in my judgment, from what many Republicans are saying about Biden. And therefore, I do find it really disturbing and dangerous that that's the message right now, even where, I mean, you can obviously have your criticisms of the Biden administration and the way they've handled things. Today we recorded Beg to Differ with the great Corey Shockey. And really, really good episode, and disturbing though, actually, because we sort of strayed into the area of this could actually become a wider war. I mean, it really could. The Russians are, they are ramping up their killing of civilians, their use of forbidden weapons like cluster bombs, et cetera. And then the question, and this goes back to what Bill was saying, actually, Breedlove is one of the people who is sort of speculating, how much can we sit by and see happen to innocent civilians before feeling that we have to run risks for them, which means, yes, running risks of getting into a war with Russia by, say, enforcing a no-fly zone and that kind of thing. So we're in a really, we're in a dangerous moment, a very, very dangerous moment. Some people think the most fraught since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I don't think that the Republicans have been helpful.
Yeah, no, David, thought just on that, next steps that Biden should be doing, thoughts on the energy, additional energy sanctions.
I forgot to do energy.
Yeah, no, that's
Sorry.
okay. Or you can go back to that, Mona, and then, or after David, and then if you disagree with them, and then any additional, we're getting a lot of Q&A questions just about, which kind of speaks to this, what are the next steps, right? What else could they do in energy? A lot of people on the Q&A are saying, now, why exactly can't we do a no-fly zone? What's the case against the no-fly zone? Shouldn't we be considering that or doing that? So on both of those, David, then we'd just go around the horn.
Well, on taking a kick at the Biden administration, I'm happy to do that. I did that in writing at The Atlantic. The idea that after the president did this fervent defense of collective security and allied cooperation in the first third of his State of the Union speech, the next third is how we need to have Buy American in government procurement. And like, what? First, yeah. I mean, it's a President Biden said, we have a law in the books that says you have to buy American, but administrations have ignored it. It's been on the books for a century, and yet no one's obeyed it. Why not? Yeah, well, the answer to that is encoded right in the name of that bill. It's the Buy American Act of 1933. And that generally economic policies that were adopted in 1933 are not smart economic policies. This economic that trading and freedom, government procurement, the America's treaty obligations, where you trade. The United States gets a piece of the government procurement market of its allies, and they in turn get a piece of the government procurement market of the United States. That's how we built the post-war world, and it is really troubling to me that Biden says, I want to reject the Trump view on narrow nationalism in national security, but I want to embrace the Trump view of narrow nationalism in economic policy. That's not going to work. You have to, that free trade and collective security go hand in hand. They are indispensable partners. They understood that in 1947. They understood that in 1987, and we need to understand that now. So that is discouraging to me. As to next steps, look, what is happening is unspeakable in Ukraine, but it's also what we are also seeing is a lot of Russian weakness, and we should not race to ourselves escalate a confrontation when what we ought to be playing for is thinking about how do we facilitate and expedite the dissolution of the Republican Army, of the Russian Army, and ideas that I've been very interested in are not no-fly zones, but bounties to deserters and prisoners of war who have not committed war crimes. That we should make sure that every Russian with a rifle knows that if he can find some way to cross over to the other line, there's a 36-month work visa in a Schengen country, there's a hot meal, there's a comfortable bed, there's a free cell phone. Come on over. We've got work, and the work is paid in pounds and euros and not in your worthless rubles. And the death benefit your family is going to get if you get killed for Putin is pennies. Meanwhile, you could be earning a handsome living in Hamburg or in Barcelona, where people are hiring right now. Please come over and just try. And the goal should be to try to find some way to make that army just dissolve and to create a kind of Russo-Japanese war situation where the army just gets up and walks home.
Yeah, I mean,
Anything else in addition, Bill? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I on the one hand, I'm always wary of sort of sitting here, knowing how little we know, and sort of saying, why aren't they doing this? And then it turns out, I mean, this happened to me in 1990 when Saddam went to Kuwait. I was in the White House and Vice President, Chief of Staff. I wasn't, I kind of knew what we were doing. I wasn't a player at all, really. But friends of mine who were, had served in the Reagan administration and were very, little doubts about Bush, why aren't they doing this? And I couldn't say anything really. And I'd say, well, I'll keep calm. And it turned, the reason we weren't doing something on Tuesday was because we were having complicated negotiations. So the French and Germans and the Saudis would be on board on Wednesday, and it was perfectly reasonable, and they were going in the right direction. And it just was a question of the mechanics of government, or sometimes of timing, or sometimes of just close judgment calls. So I tend to give administrations in circumstances like this a fair amount of benefit of the doubt. And I think they deserve it for some of what they've done on diplomacy, where I think they've really done a good job of letting the Europeans take the lead where they were able to, encouraging them to, and then not making it look like the Americans are just beating the drum and dragging those reluctant Europeans along, even if that might be happening a bit behind the scenes, and getting the Europeans fully invested and getting their people invested. It doesn't look like an American-led diplomatic alliance. In a way, it looks like a European one almost, and which is, and especially on the sanctions, if you had said 2-3 weeks ago the Germans would be where they were, that's really terrific. Having said that, people I respect like Breedlove and Volker and others who really know this stuff in a granular way are concerned. They're open to the counter argument I would make that maybe they'll do this 3 days from now, and let's see, as David is saying, whether we just can't have more disintegration of the Russian force first without giving Putin any excuse to sort of marshal people together to fight against us overstepping. I do worry a little about the intelligence sharing, and apparently we haven't sent in some of the planes we could have allowed our allies to send in to help the Ukrainian Air Force, some of the anti-air stuff. So I kind of feel, and also on the kind of stuff David's been talking about, which he has been pushing, which is, I think, very intelligent, the bounties and so forth, penalties and rewards for individual soldiers, individual units deserting and so forth. Maybe a little lack of imagination maybe on our part. So I'm a little worried that we're not, we're doing this at 80% or 90%, not 100%. But I think directionally, one has to say the Biden administration's been good, and we'll see what happens. But yes, I very much agree with what Mona said too. If we really end up with a slaughter here in major cities, and the pressure will be so great and should be so great for us to at least think about doing something. Now, whether we can. One point on no-fly zone, it's sort of funny that became the go-to thing quickly for people who didn't know much, frankly, and just like, hey, no-fly zone. They heard about it vaguely in Kurdistan in the 90s, and it seemed to work, but it's very difficult. I mean, actually enforcing a 24/7 no-fly zone, just think about it for a second, requires like dozens, hundreds of planes flying around, and they have to go from bases, they have to be refueled. It's actually weirdly easier to go bomb the tank column, and that actually just requires you to take off, bomb the tank column, and go back to your base in Germany. So the practicalities of the no-fly zone are a bit daunting, I think, for people who know a lot, and not maybe the best. If you're going to push the envelope, maybe not the most effective way. But we could also be doing it in 4 or 5 days. Our friend Bob Kagan said to me before the war began, he said, look, the one thing we do know is these wars are very unpredictable. And both internationally, also in domestic politics, and this was a shrewd observation of his, if you think about Europe especially, things happen 2 weeks in that no one thought could happen. No one for 10 years have been, 20 years have been outside the realm of possibility. That's kind of what happens in these fast-moving dynamic situations. It could be for the worse, or it could be for the better. Democratic governments could fall in a war, or autocratic governments could fall in a war, or the NATO can be united, or NATO can be divided. And so I think so far most of the dynamism has been positive, really, and the surprises have been positive. But I'm a little worried about, again, a lack of imagination and maybe lack of little too much risk aversion on the parts of some in the Biden administration.
I want to tease out worries a little more. Mona, you're next, but just really quick. If you're on YouTube right now, the chat is on fire. You're missing a lot of fun. JVL is in there making fun of me, and a little back and forth about From's bounty plan. So become a Bulwark Plus member, get in there. I want everyone in the chat. What prompted this is interested in right now as we speak on CNN. I don't want obviously you're not going to have deep thoughts about a specific breaking news item, but it's worth mentioning that it appears there's a firefight happening at a nuclear plant in Ukraine. Russia shelling the plant. Some concerns about this. There's live video of it on CNN. So I want to tie that into a question that I want to have for everybody to make everybody nice and riled up here on a Thursday evening, and that's what are you worried about right now? Like, what are worst case scenarios that are realistic, from all of you, given your experience in situations like this? So thoughts on either the nuclear plant or just general worries. Start with Mona and then just go around the horn.
Well, I'm worried that that because you never know in war, it is like opening a door to a dark room, as Hitler said, and you don't know what's going to happen. And there are so many scenarios that you can imagine that could lead to a serious confrontation. Now, Putin has been saber rattling his nuclear weapons. And it is possible, one of the things that I'm thinking of these days is the number of people who have said that he is different from the way he was even a few years ago, that he's even more irrational, that he, even though he was always evil, he never quite seemed irrational. And right now there's sincere doubt about that. So if he is irrational and unreachable, we don't really know what he's capable of next. So that is worrying. You also worry about things like if the Poles begin to transfer weapons across their border, and then there's an incident with Russian forces attempting to stop that from happening, and then you have a firefight between NATO, a NATO country, and the Russians, and then what do? We're NATO, and you can see this spiraling into a broader conflict. So that's a big concern. I am reminded, though, I have to say, that it was a little more than 100 years ago that Germany had a problem with Russia, and they solved it by putting somebody on a sealed train from Switzerland and sending him right into Russia. And I'm wondering if we can't get the Germans to do that again, except this time the train would be to extract Putin. I'm referring, of course, to Lenin. But anyway, it is amazing. Just one more quotation, which is been doing the rounds recently and is so right, which is apparently Lenin once said that decades go by where nothing happens, and sometimes
weeks go by where decades happen.
Weeks. Sorry, what was the second part?
There are weeks when decades happen.
There are weeks when decade happen. Thank you, Tim. I should take you with me everywhere for when I forget my quotes. Yeah, that's it.
David, thoughts on your concerns? Any thoughts on the nuclear plant?
Okay, I'm a warrior. I have a lot of concerns. Let me give you,
great, perfect.
Let me.
We only have 20 minutes left, so
let me give you 5, and I'll do them rapid fire.
Okay.
My first concern is that Russia takes a Grozny approach to Kiev and just tries to mash artillery fire it into rubble, destroying one of Europe's great cities and killing hundreds of thousands of people. This won't accomplish anything, but it will, the human suffering and the strategic and tactical problems that are created. The second thing I worry about is Polish public opinion. If Russia is continuing to slaughter and kill, do Poles stand for it? A friend of ours tells a joke about the Polish commander who is faced with the problem so often faced in Polish history that the country is simultaneously invaded by Germany and Russia, and who do you fight first? And the answer is you fight Germany first because business must come before pleasure. So I'm worried that Poland gets dragged into this, and public opinion forces Poland, a NATO partner, into some more forward, way more than the United States would wish, forward-leaning. I'm worried about grain prices and their effect on destabilizing polities across North Africa, Egypt, especially the largest grain importer in the world. I'm worried about a Russian decapitation strike that kills Zelensky and leaves Ukraine, which is right now united under his leadership, but is not normally a united country, leaves it disunited. And the final thing I'm worried about is the patience of the American motorist, that this war is going to cause gasoline prices to rise. It is going to cause food prices to rise. Those prices were rising anyway. How do Americans react as the drama of the war fades, as it becomes story 2, 3, 4? And do they end up electing a lot of isolationist types in November, which is a long way away, hampering aid to Ukraine because they're unhappy about the price of gasoline at the pump?
Bill, I have a separate question I want to go to you on, but just really quick, because the Zelensky point I think is so smart, and we both JVL and I've written about the power of Zelensky this week, and many others have outside the Bulwark as well. Is there a natural successor if that happens? Do we have any sort of insight?
I doubt it. I doubt it, but these things again are unpredictable. Maybe someone emerges quickly or not, but it's a great fear. I mean, I can just mention 2 very quickly.
No, that's really quick. Because I'm going to add to your 2 things very quickly. The number 1 question in the chat is from a person named JVL, so it's a very active reader. Is there a level of destruction that Russia could inflict on Ukraine that would make it politically necessary for NATO to enter the conflict militarily? So I guess I will add that into the concerns bucket, that things go so bad in Ukraine that NATO feels compelled to do something. So with your 2, add that onto the top.
I think that's quite possible. I mean, necessary is too strong, though. I mean, it could be a horrible situation where maybe people like me would say we should take a risk of doing something, and the president would decide not to, which maybe he would incidentally, that might be a reasonable decision. There are tough calculations, tough equities on both sides of that argument. But then we're going to watch. I mean, the horror of watching what might be happening, saying we're the most powerful country in the world, but we're a little too risky to do this because they do have nuclear weapons. I mean, this is where I think people haven't. I don't blame anyone for that. I mean, this is where we may be facing very difficult decisions, and we need to have a very grown-up attitude, one way or the other, and either to take more risk, probably where I would be, or not to take it and just be solemn about what we're not doing, But that's sort of a World War II type situation where you have to watch horrible things happen, but you can't do certain things, and that's not something we're accustomed to or don't want to be accustomed to, frankly. So, I mean, I do think I'll just take 2 very quick stories that really build on David's very good list of all the difficult things that could happen. And then one thing I would say is people do need to be more. I don't know, you can't expect the president to lay all this out, but someone should be saying this so the public isn't so surprised when, this isn't over in a week, or it doesn't have a happy ending like some, Netflix series, and it might be very difficult and very tragic and terrible and face real risk. 2 serious people I know, different people, not connected to each other, but both having served in government, senior foreign policy24 hours have said to me, one said, I could write a short piece if you want for the Bulwark on what if Putin does use tactical nuclear weapons as a kind of gesture, partly for military reasons, but mostly because he wants to, and because he has enough command and control over apparently the Russian, let's just assume, nuclear forces. here, what would we do? And I could sketch out what I think we should be thinking about right now. And I hope the Defense Department is thinking about right now, but this person isn't so confident they are, because that's a tough meeting to even convene at the Pentagon or with the civilians. And, this range from defensive things and anti-nuclear, anti-radiation, into countermeasures, and maybe trying to destroy Putin's ability to issue that command, or find generals who would disobey it, and which involves a huge amount of active espionage, not just monitoring their communications, which is good too. I mean, I'm just thinking about that stuff in a real time sort of way is something that really, and I actually said, well, let's wait, because I don't want to, it's always hard to even speculate about, and you could cause something. You don't want to just cause any trouble when you don't have to. I just very much hope the administration, I guess is the way I put this, is thinking actively about these things and doing absolutely everything it can to destroy Putin's ability to get subordinates to carry out some of those orders. And generally, I think to subvert Putin's ability to run the country. I mean, this is the moment to and so another friend of mine, just to finish the story, said, he was in government. He said, I wonder if there's a finding about Putin. And actually, it was so out of the blue, I didn't quite understand. What do you mean about that? So, well, look, the agents, there have been times in the past we've decided that one individual was able to cause so much horror, so much damage, that there have been findings that if possible, we might seek to remove that person. And that would be a presidential finding, which would authorize certain covert activities. And it's like, oh my God, now we're in some, Netflix series or something. But I mean, that would be the responsible thing to do if doable, and if there wouldn't be a counter, Russian finding, whatever they call those things, just in
case there's a journalist writing this who's going to just sort of capture what happened today. Was that just Bill Kristol calls for assassination of Putin? Was that?
I mean, if he keeled over, the best, most humanitarian thing that could happen, though, would be if he keeled over an hour from now, right? I think it would cause disarray. I don't believe there'd be that much stomach for continuing the war among his deputies and subordinates. It would be good for the Russian people. It would be good for the Ukrainian people. I'm not saying we could make it happen. I'm not saying we should. There'd be the question of what they would do to others.
I'll say we should. We can put it on me. A little more baggage, a little less baggage to have you do it. I have two things I want to close with David on, or maybe not close, but two things I want to make sure we have enough time to get to David on. But Mona, I want to ask you, particularly since you talked to Corey today and any other conversations, my friend John Zipper writes in the QAA, the strength of the Russian invading force. We've been talking about worst case scenarios. Is there a best case scenario here besides Putin's death? They seem to be bogged down, abandoning equipment, weak supply lines. Did Corey have thoughts on that today? Do we have, I think there's also been some words that because of the planes, because of the sanctions, that it's going to be hard for them to fly planes a few weeks hence. What do you have any?
We talked about this a little bit. Look, so first of all, a tiny bit of a grain of salt about all of these reports about how terrible things are for the Russian army, because as much as I am 1,000% behind the brave Ukrainians, you have to say their propaganda has been excellent, right? And I don't know how much of it is actually real and how much isn't. On the other hand, I would say that a great, best case scenario would be that they are all true, that the Russians are indeed sabotaging their own trucks, which there have been reports of, that they are reluctant to fight, that they are mostly young draftees who did not know they were going to fight in Ukraine and are reluctant to kill fellow Slavs. We've heard all of these things. If they're true, that would be fantastic. And even more fantastic would be if the people in what Kasparov calls the power vertical in Russia come to the conclusion that Putin is leading them into the worst catastrophe in Russian history, and that the only answer is to take him out. That would be ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world. So,
David, if you had any best case, I'll let you chime in with the best case scenario. But in addition, I've been told you had some meetings this week and been discussing about the refugee issue, and I think that's something we haven't discussed at all here. Obviously, I think 600 plus thousand, probably more at this point now, already people displaced from Europe. So thoughts on best case scenario and refugee options going forward?
Okay, well, first, I'm not even sure the word refugee is the right word to describe the movement out of Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has a relationship with the European Union. The European Union has committed in principle to accepting Ukraine as a member. That implies that Ukrainians, they're not exactly refugees, that what we're moving toward is a world in which, as soon as this war is over, Ukrainians have a right to relocate anywhere in the European Union that they want to live. And so you could imagine that being accelerated. I mean, you're seeing this already, where if you have a Ukrainian passport and you show up on a German train, you don't have to pay the fare. They're just these are not like the Syrian movements of 2015 that create international questions. That this is increasingly something that Europe is looking at as a domestic issue. That these are like people displaced from an internal catastrophe who have an as of right, or who within months or not many more months will have an as of right legal qualification to settle in any Schengen or EU country that they want to settle in. More best case scenarios. I think one of the things that I've been impressed by is how, despite all these fantasies of China joining Russia in some Eurasia bloc, I think the Chinese are watching this and thinking, this looks dumb. This looks like a stupid way to challenge the rest of the world. And by the way, this fantasy that if you just amass enough gold in your vault, that you can escape the international banking system, it's not true. And this idea that a controlled currency from a country whose citizens don't trust it can be a global reserve currency, that isn't true either. So one of the best case scenarios is that the Chinese quietly defect. And I think there's a lot of sign that they're doing that. And a lot of the Russian plans depend on permission from China. It is to China that they hope to sell their gold reserve if they have to liquidate their gold reserves to get some cash. And it is from China they hope to import whatever imports they get. So a best case scenario would be the Chinese decide not to be party to that. But I have to say, I don't believe in the best case scenarios. I think we're in for something pretty grim. And while I'm hopeful in the long term, I think the short term is going to be grim.
The Ethereum and NFT strategy for Russia also doesn't seem to be.
That was who had that joke. That was such a good joke, because it's also a good joke about the NFTs that you can quote it. But
I can't quote it. I don't know.
The quote was that we create an NFT of Ukraine and give it to Putin, and that way he can believe he owns it, even though he really doesn't.
A non-fungible token. I missed that joke. That is very
That's
good. I love that. A non-fungible Ukraine, an NFU. I want to go back to David for you on this one, because our listeners don't get to hear from you as much, and if we have time, Mona and Bill can chime in. But just domestically speaking, for all of the, I think you did a good job kind of covering the strengths and weaknesses of Biden's State of the Union. One of the things that I've been concerned about the Biden administration is increasingly they at least seem aware about how the inflation issues are affecting their political standing, which I don't know that they were last fall for some reason, but they're at least aware now, which is a step in the right direction. But I don't get the sense of the urgency, that they're acting with a lot of urgency, either politically or using the economic levers that they have. So I would love to hear from you on that. I think the last time we were together on a Bulwark live stream, you were offering the economic rose-colored glasses scenario for the Biden administration. This was before inflation hit, which hasn't kind of come to pass. So I don't know if you have those glasses on still or have other thoughts on that.
Look, I'm basically optimistic about the American economy, and I do think that what we're calling inflation is the shock, is adjusting to the shock of it's like if you've ever been hurt, the blood leaves your arm, and then a few minutes later, the blood returns to the arm, and it's extremely painful when the blood returns to the tissues that it had evacuated. And I think that's a little bit what is happening with prices. As normal economic activity is reviving, it's reviving in a lopsided way. And so there are supply shocks and price shocks. I think President Biden could have done his State of the Union in about 20 minutes. 15 minutes on Ukraine. 15 minutes on Ukraine. And then 5 minutes on criminals belong in prison. Streets aren't toilets. This is a great and good country, and you are lucky to live here. And then maybe something like America. The prices are too damn high, but we're doing everything we can to reestablish price stability. Good night. that the problem is that he gave that speech to wavering Democrats and not to wavering Americans. That speech was all about consolidating his party and not enough about thinking about how does the country where does he speak to the entire country. And this goes both to the strengths and weaknesses of Biden as a president, which is he's always been a party manager. He's always been a party guy. His view of his role is always to find out where the dead center of the Democratic Party is and to get there. And that he now has to adjust to, all your political life, Joe, you've been a leading indicator. Now you're a leader, and that's a different job.
Mona, Bill, domestic politics for a minute. Just thinking of this, obviously, we discussed this a little bit. We hit it with the concern, I guess David did, about the concern about the price at the pump going up.
Let me say a word about that, because I do think that was a true missed opportunity for President Biden. Look, he presented this sort of world historical event where Russia has, changed the history of Europe and the history of the world in overnight. And he presented, yes, we're united with our allies against this aggression, blah, blah, blah. And then instead of saying, look, this is going to be a little bit difficult. This is going to involve a certain amount of sacrifice for all of us. Luckily, we're not actually going to have to, give our blood and treasure, but we are going to see higher prices. And that's something that's just part of this global struggle against this vicious aggressor. He didn't do that. He said, oh, no, you're not going to feel it. I'm just going to make sure only the Russians feel the pain. That's my goal. Well, so he's now not prepared the American people for any kind of sacrifice. Therefore, when the price does go up, and I expect that it probably will with the inflation that we already had, and the disruptions in supplies that will now come as a result of this war and all of the sanctions, when the price goes up, people will say, well, Biden said he was going to prevent the prices from going up, and now they're going up. See, he let us down. And so I'm concerned that will only diminish people's willingness to be patient about price increases.
We have 2 minutes left, and I had 2 bonus topics. So I don't think we'll be able to get to either of them in full, but I'm going to offer them to David and see which one he would rather rant about. We had, I don't know if you noticed, a Texas primary yesterday or 2 days ago now. And in the most interesting race, Van Taylor, who was a down-the-line Donald Trump supporter, was getting primaried because he had committed the grave sin of voting not to impeach Donald Trump, but voting for a January 6th commission. He did not get to 50%. He did not get to a runoff. And the day after, it was revealed that he was having an affair with a jihadist, the woman that was the ISIS bride. And so my short summary of the Texas primary race is that all of Donald Trump's candidates won in every race, and the most normal candidate did not win, and the normal Republican candidate is the one who had the affair with the ISIS bride. So that's a little concerning of the Republican Party. On the far left, right down the street from me in Berkeley, where there are more Black Lives Matter signs than there are Black people, they've had a court ruling that is banning the school from expanding its number of number of students who would get a good quality public education here in California, because they don't want to build any more houses in Berkeley, where it already costs $1.5 million to get a normal family home. And yet this is all in support of some sort of progress. So here's the state of our two political parties. David, we've got 1 minute left. Thank you for coming with us. Can you add anything, any joy to that?
I'll just say about the ISIS bride, I'll just quote E.M. Forster. Is there so much joy and happiness in our world that we should question any of it when it appears to anybody? If the man is happy with his ISIS bride, let him be happy.
Yeah, well, he's happy with his ISIS bride, but the rest of us are getting the pro-insurrectionist challenger to his congressional race and replacing, the only kind of quasi-normal member of the Texas.
And I didn't follow it that
congregation.
closely, but I think she's married to someone else. Was that right?
I think they both are.
It's complicated. It's
Yeah, but hey,
complicated.
love is love. Love is love. Okay. All right. Thank you to Bill Crystal, to Mona Charon, to David Frum. Hope that was enlightening and invigorating for everybody. We will see you next week on Thursday Night Bulwark. We love y'all. Peace.
Thank
Slava
you.